This is Peter,
And this is Tom.
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to the podcast.
Hello. Today, what we're going to look at is a history of presidential pardons, seeing the fact as one president is leaving, they always pardon several individuals. So we're going to look at some of the more controversial or interesting pardons that have taken place for more than 200 years when presidents had this authority to do this.
Yep. So I think we're going to start off more or less with just the history of the pardon power and how it came to be and where it stems from, and some of the early controversies with the power even being, or rather existing, in the Constitution of the United States. And then, as you said, we'll just kind of run through some of the controversial ones. Maybe we'll provide some statistics as to, which president pardoned the most
Yeah,
versus
we'll
which
go over some
president pardoned the least.
presidents, go over some situations, why it happened. Because a lot of it is because of what's going on in the country at the time. Some of these pardons take place. We'll just give you a little
Yeah.
background on it, basically. So basically, the power of a pardon, of a presidential pardon, it's pretty controversial, and whether or not they should have this power, it raised a lot of legal questions about
Mhm.
whether they are straying from really what the founders, what the framers intended to. But all basically goes down to Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution,
Yep.
which authorizes the president to grant pardons and other forms of clemency involving offenses against the United States. That's where that comes from. And the
And there's a
goal of
key here. A lot of people don't realize it's against federal offenses
yeah.
because it's against the United States. So
Yeah.
if you commit a state offense or a local offense, the president cannot pardon that.
No, that's
This
just
is only for federal offenses.
governors can do that.
Yes.
Governors,
Yep.
obviously, now the president's not going to be doing those sorts of things. And the
Nope.
goal of it is to ensure like a more fairness in the criminal justice system and to avoid abuses by prosecutors. And it was
Mhm.
also designed really to restore tranquility of the Commonwealth. That was also written in the Constitution.
Yep.
That's what Alexander wrote, and he was obviously one of the nation's founders, right? Alexander
Hamilton. Yep.
Got to say it like that. Alexander Hamilton. From the for those of you that have seen the play on Disney Plus, you know what I'm talking
Have
about.
you ever seen it?
I saw it on Disney Plus. I didn't see it in
Like live? No, I've
in
never
person.
seen it.
Back when Broadway was open. No, I did not.
I figure like I should see it. Like all my students
It's
get
good.
really excited about talking about just this time period whenever I talk about Federalist period, mainly because of this play. And that's kind of like, oh, it's I know everything about Alexander Hamilton, and I'm like, all right, well, let's calm down there.
I don't know everything about it. Well, it was based on a book, but that's another podcast. We'll do Hamilton another podcast.
Okay, you've been wanting to do that one for a while, so we really should.
I said we should do
one.
like the true Hamilton podcast or something like that.
We'll get there. But as you said, 1787 Constitutional Convention, Alexander Hamilton is the one that proposes this idea. And it actually comes from the English laws, right? That monarchs have been granted for years, where monarchies would have the power to grant mercy to any of their subjects at any point, right? And the practice was extended to governors of British colonies in America. So this whole idea of pardon stems from the crown, the British crown, eventually came over through governors, British colonies, the 13 colonies. And it was from this where the idea kind of stemmed forth by Alexander Hamilton, who proposed it. Like, you know what? We should give our executive this very same power. Right?
That's the idea.
And as you've mentioned, a lot of people were, even at the time, were kind of like, hey, I don't know about this. This is a very controversial topic and issue. Even to the point that they try to have like a last minute proposal to deny this ability to the president.
They're worried what it could do. They think it's giving too much power to one person.
Yep. And at the Constitutional Convention, until the very second, this was a very, it's interesting because like we don't really talk about this. I don't know about you, but when I teach this, like I don't talk about this being a frequently voted down idea or controversial, but it seems like it really was based on the research I've been doing.
I mean, there's always some controversial pardons every end of every term that take place. And some have gone down history. Some are more well known than others. Some are more controversial at the time. But as history goes by, people just forget about it. Because once the president pardons an individual, that's it. It's done. There's no appeal. There's no way to. Now, if they commit another crime, I guess that's different. I don't guess that is different.
Yep.
But for that crime, that's it. It's done. So people can be outraged, but eventually it's just going to fade away, and they're going to find something else to get mad at.
Yeah, plenty of things this day and age. the one thing that they try to really do is pardons in cases of treason. Like that's the one thing they try to take away in during the Constitutional Convention. Like, okay, fine, we'll give the president the ability to grant pardons, but not in cases of treason. And that was eventually voted down, and they kind of wrote it as is, as you mentioned, for federal crimes. The only thing that the president cannot, and that is enumerated in the Constitution, meaning that it is written in the Constitution,
Yeah.
that the only thing that the president may not use the clemency powers to stop is themselves or others from being impeached by Congress. That was actually written in there. That's almost like the only limit on it. So you cannot stop your own impeachment by Congress or impeachment of others by Congress. Um, Also, the president essentially has, according to the Constitution, has four kinds of pardon powers, right? They all, as we mentioned, apply to only federal, not state crimes. The president may issue a pardon that wipes out a crime entirely. They could shorten or do away with the criminal sentence, right, with a commutation. They could release a person from a legal obligation, like a fine or with a remission, or they could put off a person's sentence for a period of time, um, only to have to do it, later on. So those are essentially the four kinds of pardon powers. But as you mentioned, besides that, almost unlimited pardon power, right?
Yeah,
It's very
well,
contentious.
and it's not even limited to people because every year the president pardons a turkey at Thanksgiving.
Yes.
So that's probably one that's the most famous as far as people hear about that. That around Thanksgiving time, the president, that's not a real thing, obviously. And actually, that turkey winds up dying a few days later, a few weeks later, anyway.
Really?
Yeah, I was reading an
Get out of
article.
here.
Yeah,
I'm
again,
like genuinely upset now.
I don't want to get off topic. Yeah, they always said they make a big deal. Oh, this is the turkey that's being pardoned, but because how turkeys are bred and when they're usually slaughtered and stuff like that, they don't live. They live for maybe a few weeks, a few months after, that, and they just die anyway. Instead of being like
Well,
a
the real
Thanksgiving
question is,
meal.
what do they do with the dang turkey? Do they eat it?
Well, then they cook it up and yeah, then they eat it. I'm sure. No, I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
messed up.
I don't know what they do
Oh
to
man,
these turkeys
did
after
you
they
have a rough
die.
day today? Did Thomas Reska have a rough day today?
It wasn't a rough day, just a long day. Let's go. Pardons, pardons.
All right, wait, hold on. So, all right, George Mason of
Gotta
Pennsylvania,
do
right?
pardons.
This is just the last thing. He was a delegate he was the only delegate technically that abstained from signing the Constitution because of the fact that the pardon power was granted to the president.
He really
Clearly,
didn't like it. Then he really didn't like it. Yeah.
yeah, he really didn't like it. Clearly, all other ones are okay with it. But this guy specifically said, "I'm not signing the Constitution. I'm going to abstain from signing it because of this." He thought it was just dangerous to
It
use.
was it was too great of a power. They're really worried that that absolute power is going to corrupt absolutely. That if we give a president this type of power, they're going to pardon their friends, just people that they like, and things like that. They're not necessarily going to make it based on law. It's a lot of power. You're giving one person the ability to overturn a court case, a jury's decision. Basically, that's
Yeah.
a lot of power.
I get it. I don't know about you, but I get a lot of what if questions whenever I teach this.
Yeah,
Like,
what if can he
what
do this?
if?
Well,
Yeah.
hopefully we can answer these what if questions.
Well, hopefully,
Yes.
right? I mean, I get
Say,
some crazy what if questions from my students over the years. I've gotten some really. How about this one? This is a real thing. Mr. Zablocki, if a woman is pregnant and she's on a plane and the plane is flying over the Mexican American border and the baby like comes out at that given second when it's like right above the border, is the baby American or is it Mexican?
oh, that's easy.
Dude, but I know. Wait, but well, by the way, the answer is mother's nationality. That's what the baby
Yeah,
is.
yeah. It's also where it's also it was an American airliner, so it's also going to be
Yeah,
American.
but these are the type of questions that I get, like the what
Yes,
if
that's
questions.
different. My what if questions are usually about superheroes and who would win in a fight. That's usually
Oh,
what I
that's so
get.
funny. That's so funny. But yeah, I get a lot with this one too. Like, so what? So he technically could pardon. Like, I'm like, yes. The answer is yes, 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 yes. So let's get into some of these pardons, right?
Well, let's
You want to
start with George
you help me,
Washington.
right?
So,
All right.
like again, Washington sets the first precedent for a bunch of things. He also is the first one to use pardons as a way of basically a gesture of social and political togetherness, so they kind of calm things down. And the big thing was there was obviously the Whiskey Rebellion takes place, and out of the 16 people that get arrested for inciting this whiskey rebellion, which is a whole other topic that we can get into.
Mhm.
Farmers angry about the whiskey, they go and rebel. And
They're angry
Washington's
about a tax. Essentially,
tax,
it's
yeah,
the very first ever under the Constitution tax. So they used the same moniker. These farmers, Tom, as you mentioned, they use the moniker of this is taxation without representation. We're not paying this tax, and
yeah.
and then they march out in this rebellion. However, this was by definition literally taxation with representation because this is the very first tax that is
They
passed
didn't
under
really
the
fully
Constitution.
understand. They just got mad that their alcohol was basically being taxed, among
Exactly.
other things. And in
Yeah.
Washington gets a what 13,000 troop militia.
Yeah.
Basically, George Washington marches, and that kind of shuts it down right there. Once they see Washington, they pretty much stop. And out of the people that get arrested, two of them are actually sentenced to death. John Mitchell and Philip Weigel are actually sentenced for death for their participation in the Whiskey Rebellion. And later on, Washington will actually pardon them. And he does this for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons he does it is because he knows he's trying to bring the country back together. And plus, he knows if he kills these two, if the country sentences him to death, that it's probably going to create more problems than what it's worth. So
Yeah.
the idea was it's gonna try to get rid of that further dissent and discontent that the people have with the president or the powers that be at this time. In July of 1795, he just pardons them both.
Another one that really kind of pardons Thomas Jefferson, right? In the election of 1800s, after his election, Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States, he pardoned a lot of people that were convicted under the Sedition Acts of 1798. And that was essentially a law that was unconstitutional. It was eventually repealed. It was passed during the second presidency of only term of John Adams, in which Congress and John Adams essentially decided that people could be convicted for saying bad things, about the government. So if you said anything bad about the government, they could literally, especially if you wrote it, like if you published something, you would be thrown in jail. And Thomas Jefferson, when he became president after John Adams, he kind of decided like that was unconstitutional. So he essentially pardoned all the people that were convicted under this act.
And that's really what it's
And
supposed to be, right? It's not so much supposed to be, all right, we feel bad for this person or whatever. It's more of to correct a wrong that was done. That's why the pardon's
yep,
really there.
yep. His followers, so Monroe and Madison Monroe that followed after him, they're actually pardoned a few pirates, which would some people thought was interesting at the time. But back then, pirates, most of the pirates, specifically the ones they pardoned, were more like smugglers, which was very American at the time. Not in the sense of like Pirates of the Caribbean pirates.
No,
And then there's one that's really kind of interesting, the George Wilson case.
he was pardoned because he was after he received a death sentence for endangering life and committing robbery, right?
Yeah, him and his buddy,
He was
right?
robbing trains.
Exactly. Him and his buddy were robbing trains, and they were both committed. And his buddy winds up being hanged. And here is George Wilson, who happens to actually have a lot of friends in Washington, and he's about to be hanged as well because he's the co-conspirator or I guess, robber. But his friends in Washington know Andrew Jackson, so they petition Andrew Jackson in 1833 to pardon this guy, right? Just, you please do something, we don't want him to die. They were stealing US mail, which is like a federal offense. A lot of people don't realize this, but like if you go for a joyride and start knocking down people's mailboxes, that's actually a federal crime.
Yeah.
Like, don't touch anyone's mailbox.
And they
That's a
also put a
federal
gun
crime.
to a mail carriers. They pull the gun
Yes.
on the mail carrier. So that's that's attacking a federal employee.
Yes. So Wilson winds up getting pardoned by Andrew Jackson, and this is
But
where the
Jackson
case
didn't
kind
care.
of turns.
Jackson's just like, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, whatever. I'll do it.
There
I'll
was no
pardon him.
problem. He didn't even like. He said he didn't even like think twice. They asked him that they were going to have to give him reasons. He's like, yeah, he's your friend. Fine, I'll pardon him. Which again
Yeah,
is not what the framers were really going for. So
yeah,
you have Jefferson, who basically follows the Constitution, is following what the framers said, and here's Jackson be like, yeah, sure, it's that's fine. I
yeah.
can do it. It's good. Not an issue. Not an issue.
What was really crazy about this
Yeah,
this case kind of
it becomes an issue though.
Yeah, it takes a turn because Wilson actually refuses the pardon. Right? He's like, I don't want to be pardoned. Right? He goes, I deserve this. So
It's like I
the
did it.
case
Well, how can you pardon me for something I did?
exactly, and then it goes all the way to the Supreme Court because it's like, wait a second, if the president pardons somebody, doesn't that equivocally like he is free, right? So it goes to Congress. I'm sorry, it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually has to like discuss this, and they rule that what, a pardon can be rejected if it's given, and Wilson is later executed by hanging. That was a crazy turn of events.
Yeah,
So
you
because
wouldn't
of
think if
that,
someone. I mean, I don't know if people are paying attention to the news, but I know the Tiger King was hoping he was going to get pardoned so much that he actually had a limo waiting outside the prison for him because he was
wow.
expecting a presidential pardon when Trump left office, and that did not happen. So he was still stuck in jail, and the limo was left outside waiting.
I
So
guess he couldn't have rejected even if he wanted to.
yeah, but
Yeah.
the whole point is he couldn't reject it, but he wanted a pardon, he just didn't get it. And this guy got a
Yeah.
pardon and was like, "No, I'm good." So
I'm good. I don't want it.
it happened. It happens.
US It was United States versus Wilson determines that we could essentially reject a pardon. All right.
Rejected
So
pardon.
let's talk about some of these pardons that
Well,
kind of
well, you have one that was pretty controversial by James Buchanan, which pretty much goes down as a pretty bad president, right? And
yeah.
he pardons an individual, a well-known name. He pardons Brigham Young, and
Yep.
he pardons Brigham Young for his role in basically what becomes known as the Utah War, right? When
Hmm.
more or less he had all his followers, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, what becomes known as the Mormon Church, and he almost had his own little like serfdom going on in Utah. And not Young, sorry, Buchanan dispatches the army to go retake control of the territory. They were worried they were going to like succeed from the Union, basically take this territory, make it its own country. And it became like this like year-long standoff with the U.S. Army. For the most part, it was pretty bloodless, but there was an incident in September of 1857 where a group of Mormons killed over 100 civilian members of a California-bound wagon train, and Young was supposedly the one that ordered this massacre. And then what happens is Young and the followers accused of this later receive a full pardon from the president, James Buchanan, as part of really a a compromise with the federal government. All right, we're going to leave. We'll leave you alone. We'll give you a pardon, but you have to like swear that you're not going to succeed. You're not going to try to make any sort of uprising and remove Utah. Make sure you pay your taxes and things of that nature. And it was controversial at the time. It's one of those ones that's kind of forgotten about in history. You don't really hear too much about how Brigham Young had this pardon from President Buchanan.
Most of American history wants to forget about President Buchanan.
Well,
He
that's
does
it,
rank as one of the worst, if not the worst, president in United States history, um, on everyone's list.
pretty much.
By
Yeah,
everyone, I mean like historians
he's
that
always
try to do
like you always have Lincoln, Washington, a certain Jefferson up in the top five, top 10. Buchanan is always in that bottom row.
three.
He's the worst one, or right there.
I'm not going far. There's only one president between Buchanan and Andrew Johnson that I'm going to talk about. So you have Buchanan, then President Lincoln, and then Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson probably has the most controversial,
At the time,
um,
yeah.
I
And
would
probably the
say, yeah,
largest,
probably
one of the largest ones, right?
largest
It's
and
gotta be the largest.
definitely most controversial until at least, Watergate. What he does is on Christmas Day of 1868, President Andrew Johnson officially declares like a general amnesty and unconditionally pardons everyone who fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War.
Who raised
Right?
arms against the United States? Yeah,
Yep. So
which is treason.
essentially,
That's treason. Yeah,
it is 100%. And not only did he give them full pardons, but this is where it gets kind of a little interesting. He says, well, you know what? Those that were part of the Confederate government, you will not be part of this general, amnesty. You are going to have to speak to me directly, to receive a pardon. And then he winds up pardoning like 90% of these people that essentially were responsible for voting to get the South out of the Union. And it is these very same, many instances, very same politicians that would go on after this pardon, rejoin Southern state legislations and stuff like that, and ultimately create what we know today as Jim Crow laws of
yeah,
segregation.
very controversial because you had these extremes. You had individuals that wanted a full pardon, and then the other side, you wanted people. There were individuals in the government that said, "No, you take every single person that rose up against the government and you hang them.
Yeah,
This is no negotiation. These are traitors. They rose took arm against the United States. They fought 4 years against the United States in this Civil War. That's it. There's no pardons. There's no forgiveness. There's no healing. We kill them."
yeah,
They said if the
yeah.
Confederates won, they would have done it to us. So that's part of the argument too. And Johnson says, no, we have to bring the country, we have to reunite the country. We have to
I was going
learn
to say
from
that
each other.
actually. Yeah, like why would he do that? You brought up a good point. And I guess we always try to do this in the classroom. There's always two sides to the story, right? So why would he do that? Did he do that just because he felt like he was going to be like, hey, look, like I'm going to stick it to the North? No, he truly believed that by doing that, he was kind of moving the nation past the Civil War
It's also what Lincoln wanted.
and moving them forward. Yeah, no, a lot of Johnson's policies
Yeah,
are Lincoln
he was
policies.
following, and he does some other controversial things later on. That's why Johnson gets impeached, right?
Yeah,
Well,
first one to do so.
but he's also he wants to follow a lot of that Lincoln legacy. and he wants to
Yeah.
put in a lot of Lincoln's ideas. And Lincoln wanted a pardon for all Southerners. He knew there was no way to bring the country together, and on some level, he was probably without a doubt correct there.
Another one, like, so mass pardon. I think I don't know why I skipped it because it's not really a pardon. In 1862, Abe Lincoln made a very controversial but very unofficial pardon because it wasn't officially a pardon, which actually needs to be put in writing. He refused to authorize the executions of 265 Dakota tribesmen in Minnesota,
Mm.
and historians kind of put that in with the idea of a pardon. However, it was never written down. It was simply a refusal to authorize the execution. So I don't know if it really counts as a pardon, but some historians view it as such.
It's a stay of execution.
But yeah, Johnson grants up to like 90% of applicants that apply to, for him, which is, very high level Confederate officials are essentially granted amnesty. What's the only other really famous blanket pardon in American history? It happens like 100 years later, right? And I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit here, but that is Jimmy Carter.
Hmm.
So Jimmy Carter, extremely controversial as well. What essentially Jimmy Carter does is he pardons every single draft dodger from the Vietnam War. People go nuts, especially veterans are extremely upset about this. And here you have these people that kind of ran away to Canada or try to dodge the draft, and basically Carter just pardons all of them. But I just kind of stuck it in here because I thought it would fit with this idea of a big blanket
No,
pardon.
it was a blanket one, and it was also controversial because what about the ones who didn't leave, who didn't want to go, but still had to go fight in this war that they didn't want to go and fight in? That's a whole other. I remember reading somewhere though that some of it it also depended because there were others who dodged the draft and they were not allowed to come back. So it really I guess there might have been some more stipulations there.
Okay. I know Jimmy Carter had like a weird pardon like history. I mean, he pardoned Peter Yarrow
Yeah, and I saw
from the
why
musical group, Peter,
he did
Paul,
that.
and Mary.
Yeah, and that's a controversial one
Very.
because basically Yarrow was sentenced to time in jail, and that's pardon. Like I don't think that pardon would happen today,
No way. No
but it
way.
definitely
With
happened.
Me
It
Too
happened
movement?
then.
Forget it.
But in the 70s, basically he was charged with behaving indecently with a 14-year-old.
Yeah, I think she was 13 at the time, or
Yes,
14, maybe
14,
14.
13, 14.
Yeah.
And on his last day in office, Carter issued a full pardon for him. But he only
Yes.
served. He's only sentenced to 3 months in jail anyway.
Which is another thing that's crazy.
So again, that's not going to happen 2021 as opposed to 1970. Very,
Yeah.
very, very, very different. But people were outraged at that. Like, wait a minute, this guy's basically was a child molester or being
Yeah.
charged with that, found guilty of it. First, he's only getting 3 months in jail, which is okay. Not again,
Nuts.
not going to happen in 2021. But then to get a presidential pardon for that, that's just not going to happen.
Nuts. Any other older ones? I think we kind of jumped to the 20th century, but I don't know if there was really anything that was in 1800s. Really, I think Johnson was it. I mean, obviously, when you look at 20th century, the biggie of them all is what we covered a couple weeks ago, and that is Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon, right?
Yeah.
You know that Gerald Ford pardoned a lot of people.
Well, yeah,
Actually, like I didn't realize this until I started like doing the research for this. Just in 2 years, he pardoned like 382 people,
that's a lot.
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, other presidents have had more, but for a short amount of time, and most of them were definitely were related to that Watergate scandal in some way. He's basically pardoning them. He's trying to bring the country together. It's similar. I'm not comparing it exactly, but similar to what Johnson is doing. Right? He's trying to heal the country, bring the country back together. Kind of all right. This happened. We are addressing it. We're going to put it behind us. Some people are okay with that. Some people aren't, and that's what
Yeah.
happened before. And it cost Ford the election. Pardoning Nixon,
Oh
a lot
yeah.
of these Watergate people, individuals are like, all right, maybe if we did like him, we can't vote for someone who's doing that.
All right, so let's get into
But like when we're talking about pardons, we're talking about how this guy had so many, that guy had so many. I'm sure you probably found it, but what president do you think had the most pardons? It makes sense when you think about it. By far, the most pardons out of any other president.
Obama.
No, it wasn't Obama.
Obama had the most commutations
Yeah,
by far.
the most pardons
You're
and
right.
commutations of any president, and it makes sense, was FDR because he served president longer than anybody else. He's obviously going to have more. He issued 2,819 pardons,
I know. I saw that.
488 commutations, and 489 other types of clemency, for a total of 3,796 acts of legal mercy.
Did you
And
see that
most
though?
of these,
His total requests were 13,541.
Oh
He
yeah,
had
yeah.
13,541 requests. What were most of
And
these for?
most of them were for individuals that violated prohibition,
Huh.
selling alcohol, making alcohol when prohibition was a crime, when alcohol was illegal. So most of them were all dealing with the violation of prohibition, and so that's really what he was dealing with most of his pardons for.
Yeah.
What was that?
I mean, he was also there for 3 full terms, and
Yeah, from
almost 4.
33 to 45. So he had more time than any other president to basically have all of these acts of legal
Percentage-wise,
mercy, as they're called. Yeah, percentage wise.
Obama had a total of 212 pardons and 1,715 commutations, right? Which commuted
Which is a lot, but
sentences.
it's also not as
No, no.
much as some other. Truman had a lot. Truman had like over
Yeah,
2,000.
Truman had a ton. But what's interesting too is Obama, out of his total requests, right, for either clemency or pardons, he had 36,544 requests. So because he, between pardons and commutations, his total clemency was like 1,900, right? He only granted like 5% of his total requests, right?
Yeah.
While FDR had 13,000 requests as opposed to 36, and by granting a total of like 3,700, right, total clemency, he was at like a solid 28%
Mhm.
of requests granted. But in Truman, right, Truman has 5,000 total requests, and he grants a clemency of total of over a little over 2,000, which is 41% of he almost granted half of everything that came his way.
So,
What's Trump total?
well, Trump had a total of 237 pardons total.
Okay.
Obama. The reason why you probably thought Obama before, why a lot of people think of Obama so much, is because he did
Yeah,
grant
the law,
he
right?
granted 330 on his last day. So that was the most ever in a single day. On his
Yeah.
last day of office, he granted 330. He also issued, and the reason why his name came up with so many presidential pardons also is because he issued more pardons than the last 13 presidents prior combined. So he
Yeah.
wasn't really used as much. And then Obama granted a lot more. A lot of his were for drug trafficking and things of that nature,
Yep.
drug possession, some of those crimes.
Do you notice the president that has used this pardon the least? 77 total. Only 3 commutations and 74 pardons. Total of 77 is H.W. Bush.
That
Um,
makes sense.
out of
Based on
the
what you know about him.
Yeah, like he was like, nope, 77 in comparison to like, Obama's 1,900 or FDR's 3,700. So I thought that was kind of interesting. When you talk about some of these more recent ones, before we obviously get to today, what was Ronald Reagan did something with the owner of New York Yankees? Did you get that one?
Yeah, so George Steinbrenner
Yep.
was the owner of the New York Yankees, and he was convicted in 1974 on 14 criminal counts for making illegal financial contributions to the Nixon reelection campaign years earlier. And he pleaded guilty to this in obstructing justice, and he had to pay $15,000 for his crimes, which is never really anything. And he never went to jail for this. Reagan issues him a full pardon in 1989.
Yep.
So it kind of just gets rid of any wrongdoing, anything else, stops the investigations as it's done. Steinbrenner is suspended for baseball for a while. He's not allowed to be, he still can own the Yankees at the time, but he cannot be involved in the day to day activities of the Yankees during that time when he gets
And then following
suspended.
Ronald Reagan, right? You had George H.W. Bush, like we said, he was the one that did the least of modern presidents. But he did pardon 6 people that were involved in the Iran Contra arms
Yeah.
scandal.
And that's just cleaning up that mess, basically.
Yep, and a lot of people think that that's what it was. It was just like, hey, favors. Essentially, it was just favors. And because the Iran Contra scandal happened during his predecessor, Ronald Reagan's presidency, the belief is that Ronald Reagan didn't do it, so that way it didn't kind of fall like as he had anything to do with it, and it was George H.W. Bush that cleaned it up later. And then you have President Clinton pardons Patty
Oh yeah,
Hearst, which
well, he pardons in someone else too, but like
he pardons
other
his
than that.
brother.
But yeah, well, his half brother. Let's get the Patty Hearst one first,
All
I
right,
guess.
Patty Hearst, right, daughter of
He's,
newspaper
he's actually
Mo.
later on. He does his half brother.
That
earlier
kind of
on.
hurts him.
Yeah.
That kind of hurts him. But Patty Hearst, right, is a daughter of a newspaper magnate. I mean, this guy is a giant newspaper. William Randolph Hearst. Everyone kind of knows that in history. And she became an international news sensation. She was kidnapped by members of this revolutionary terrorist group.
The SLA, the Sudanese Liberation Army,
That's what it's
1974.
74. So they actually locked her up in this cupboard for like 57 days. And she was later testified to be blindfolded, raped, assaulted numerous times. And then she said she joined the SLA terrorist group in an attempt to regain her freedom, right? And that was the story at the time, at least. But then things kind of got a little complicated because she's eventually arrested. There's a lot of footage, specifically from different banks, security cameras
Of her
that
robbing
reveal
the
her,
bank, yeah.
yeah, like committing a slew of armed robberies, right? And she's screaming to the camera, and she's like super into this terrorist group essentially, and it becomes very difficult for her lawyers to try to defend her. But she is later arrested. She's charged for all these crimes that she committed, armed robberies. And even though she said she was brainwashed by captors, she was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years in prison. 1979, Carter actually lowers her sentence, and then in 2001, Clinton completely grants her.
For mom,
Full,
she's not in jail at that time when Clinton grants
no,
her
no,
the
no. She's
pardon.
no longer in jail.
So yeah,
No.
she only served 22 months of a 7-year sentence because Carter basically said no, it was too harsh of a punishment. And Carter's the reason Clinton issues a pardon in 2001. Basically, he urges him to do it, but as he's leaving office, because Carter states this, he's just still pushing for it even at that time.
Yeah. Is it? I think if you are found guilty of a federal crime, I think you lose your right to vote.
Yeah, you
Don't
lose your
you?
right to vote. You lose a lot of other things too. You can't contest a divorce. You
Yes, I
can't
think exactly. So
carry
I think that's
handgun,
kind of
things of
why
that
you
nature.
pardon.
Yeah, by getting rid of that, you get those. A pardon grants you those rights back. Like even obviously she wasn't doing this, but you fill out a job application. Were you ever convicted of a crime? If you're pardoned, you won't have to fill that out
Hmm.
like legally, or you don't have to
Yeah,
look that up.
it's erased.
It's as if it never happened, basically.
Yep. And then nepotism, right? 101. Clinton issues a pardon for his half brother Roger Clinton. After
For drugs, right? It was a drug
Yeah,
charge.
he serves a year in a prison for pleading guilty to cocaine distribution charges, like not even just possession of drugs, like distributing cocaine.
What was interesting was it was Roger Clinton, his half brother. After he got out of jail, after he was pardoned, less than a month later, he got arrested for drunk driving.
Oh
He
man,
served
yeah,
peace.
and disturbing peace. Yeah,
He had to pay a fine for that and serve 2 years and 2 years probation for that. He wasn't pardoned for that, obviously, but
yeah. Following President W. Bush. I didn't really find anything that kind of stood out for W. Bush for me.
no, it wasn't anything controversial. Again, they always pardon some low level drug offenses or crimes of. They don't usually do murderers or anything like that. It's more of, like I said, drug offenders, individual that might have more or less violent crimes. That's what you usually see. Every president's going to pardon some people. It's
And
just
also people they
who
know. I mean, a big one
yeah,
is kind of their political allies. Are pardoned very often in this
absolutely.
process.
Who's going to help them and
Um,
stuff.
and then Obama, as we mentioned before, issued the most pardons since Harry S. Truman.
And probably
He
one
granted
of the most
5.
famous ones with Obama was Chelsea Manning, right?
Yes, it was.
Well, Chelsea Manning was basically served 7 out of 35 years that she was sentenced to. She was a former Army intelligence analysis convicted of leaking documents that revealed classified information on the military and diplomatic activities around the world. A lot of spies' names, a lot of where we were doing some of that covert operations, and was caught. And Obama decided to grant Manning a reprieve, which was seen highly controversial. A lot of people were really angry about that because it's like, why this person put American lives at risk, and you're letting this person out after 7 years when they were already sentenced to 35 years. And I believe Obama was actually going back and forth whether or not he was going to do it. A lot of people were asking it, and finally on later on during his presidency, he does it.
Yep. And I think we need to also mention if I, whenever I teach the idea of Obama and pardons and pardoning the most people since Harry S. Truman, a lot of these were for these low level, non-violent drug crimes. Like the idea of like the fact that if African Americans are caught, in like a low level non-violent drug crime, they
Yeah,
usually the punishment doesn't really fit the crime.
the punishment is much more severe than if it was a white person, basically.
Yes. Yeah, and then
They're not
statistics
proportionate. They're
kind of
not
prove
proportionate.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
it's
do. Yes,
prove
statistics
that.
do prove that, and that was something that Obama and a lot of. Also, you have to understand that since the '80s and or the '90s, and obviously when Obama was president, there's a lot more of those rights groups out there that are really pushing for civil rights groups, not just for race, but just in general, that are pushing for clemency, pushing for pardons for all these individuals that are these low-level, non-violent criminals, but that they're saying that these aren't really criminals. They got mixed up in something. They might have been in the wrong place, wrong time, and so they have to have the evidence. And they're saying, "Listen, you have the power to change that." What's her name? Kim Kardashian is really big into this, where she'll pick up causes of certain individuals that they feel again low level, typically non-violent. There's a couple that were a little more violent, non-violent, and she stress and tries to get them pardoned. I believe she did get a couple from of people on her that she advocates for from Trump. Actually, did
She
pardon
did.
some of
Yep.
them. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think Trump issued like 19 pardons and 7 commutations up to his last day. At least from like I would say until last month or so. But talk about Trump. Let's kind of finish up with Trump. So you have some of his more, I guess, controversial ones. Again, this is kind of fairly fresh, but Steve Bannon, right, 67 years old. He was a key advisor in Trump's, presidential run 4 years ago, and he's charged with swindling Trump supporters over an effort to raise private funds to build the infamous U.S. Mexico border wall. He pleaded not guilty. And actually, White House officials advised Trump against pardoning Bannon, right?
And he was
Um,
really going back and forth at it, but in the last moment, he decided to pardon him.
yep. The
And
other
that,
one
and
that kind
that
of
one's probably criticized. I'm sorry to interrupt you, people. That
yeah,
to be fair, we also he's had less critical ones. Also, he did pardon former heavyweight boxing champion Jack Johnson. He was an
yep,
African American. He was arrested. This is back in 1913 because the guy crossed state lines with a white woman, which was a crime at the time. So he pardoned him for that. So he does do pardons, which obviously after Jack Johnson passed away, but he pardons that are less controversial that you might not hear about as more. But you usually hear about the ones that are more controversial that stir more stories.
yep. Yeah, and again, as we always teach, we try to stay as objective,
Yeah, objective. Yeah, not giving
non-partial.
opinions. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, he also pardoned his Little Wayne.
Yes, I
You
saw
see that
that
one?
for a gun charge.
Yeah, it was pleaded guilty in a federal court for illegally possessing a firearm. He faced up to 10 years in prison, actually, and he was scheduled to be sentenced in Florida next month, which that's not going to happen again.
Well, they're saying
Um,
one of the criticisms with Trump's pardons is that he does pardon some individuals like Jack Johnson, but that he's mostly pardoning. So they believe, for the critics, say that he's pardoning supporters, celebrities, or individuals that just kind of catches attention at
mhm.
that time, and he's like, "Oh, okay, this is an interesting case, so I'll pardon this person." So again, that's not the argument. Is that's not what the framers, that's not what the founders wanted. That's not the point of this. That's not. It's not for something that catches your interest. It's look at the case. Was it a wrong here? That's what it's
Right.
supposed to be.
And actually, Trump had a total of 10,051 total requests
He had a
for
lot.
pardon.
People really thought he was going to pardon them for no matter what. Like I said, the Tiger King thought he was going to get pardoned. I don't know
That
why.
was crazy. That was crazy. So, in the grand scheme of things, I think this is, like we said, a fairly controversial power granted by Article 2 to our president. However, I don't, over the years, besides the times that we just kind of mentioned on this podcast today, there hasn't really been many like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened, pardons. In most modern history, obviously, the granddaddy of them all is the Watergate scandal.
Yeah.
When you go back 100 years, the granddaddy of all that one was the pardoning of all Confederates. But for the
I
most
think the
part,
pardoning of turkeys is ridiculous. So I
oh,
really think the presidents have to rethink this strategy out there. And I'm
oh,
going to say my opinion here. Why do we have to pardon the turkey? What really?
honestly, where did that come from? Did you ever learn why? Like, why do we pardon the turkey? Like, who's the first? Wasn't it?
First
Oh,
president on record issuing pardon to a turkey was actually Ronald Reagan.
really?
Believe it or
Hmm.
not, but other ones have done it. But that's like the official. I guess you signed the actual papers. The first president to unofficially pardon a turkey was Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln basically does it to save the bird as like a peace offering
Well, I need to learn more of my turkey history. I clearly forgot.
because Lincoln's son had grown fond of the bird. It was given to him to like raise and feed until Thanksgiving, but Lincoln's son grew fond of the bird, so he decided to pond it. And Lincoln was an animal lover too. But Lincoln
Hmm.
didn't start the tradition, and then Harry Truman is often credited with the father of the modern day presidential turkey pardon.
Why? I mean, I guess you're right. It's a photo op. It's a nice photo op.
Yeah, again, it was just because he received it as a gift from the Poultry and Egg National Board at a public event. So they
An
basically got
egg
this.
national
Yes,
board.
that exists. So they basically got the bird as a gift, and then they say, let's not kill it, and then it becomes this thing ever since. And then John F. Kennedy was the one that started to do it publicly at the White House. That's when they had the big,
Oh, John F. Kennedy, who would love the photo op. Come
yeah.
on.
So
Nuts. Anyway, so see, there's some fun stuff out there. Fun pardons. Finish it with the turkeys, just like we started. We started with turkeys. We finished with turkeys.
bookends.
Bookends. I think we keep on saying we're not going to do any more presidential podcasts, but then when we come up with these topics, like we usually like, hey, did you see what was in the news? Or hey, did you hear this?
And
And
we try to keep it somewhat topical at times.
yeah, I would say
And
so. And we have a plan now. We have a plan of what we want to do each week, except then like something pops in our head. We're like, hey, did you hear this? And then,
it
here we are recording this.
changes the night of the podcast.
It does. Sometimes it does. Yeah, this was a fairly, I would say, last minute one.
Oh yeah, this was probably a couple hours beforehand.
Yeah, hey, dude, you know what? What about pardons?
But it works. We still get our research in, and that's sometimes.
And
you
we
have
also
to do
do
that.
research for next week's now. So technically, we're set for next week. So all is well.
We're set up.
To everyone, thank you so much for tuning in again and listening to our podcast. And our numbers are growing, which is awesome. And please, again, feel
send
free.
us emails,
Yeah, send us
posts.
emails.
Let us know what you think. If you have any ideas of anything you want us to go over, just let us know. We appreciate it all.
Awesome. So thanks for listening, guys, and thanks for tuning in.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast. And if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.